Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Episode 3 of our Council of Fans podcast. And as usual, I'm joined firstly by TolkienTube, aka Gallifane.
Hello.
I'm also joined by Nicoline Bangan.
Hey, how are you guys?
Fine, thank you. And also, as usual, joined by Mr. Penguin Poppins from the Lord Rings on Prime Reddit.
Hey.
And finally, we are joined by Chen. Hello, my friend.
Hi.
And today's video is actually going to be quite interesting, as in today's podcast we're going to be talking about the aesthetic of Numenor and how Amazon could actually portray Numenor, as there's so many different aspects that we could talk about. For example, the massive ship and fleet, and potentially it being steampunk, etc. But firstly, I would like to start with Chen. So when do you think, what time period of Numenor, just to start with the context of the viewers, what time period of Numenor do you think we'll actually see in the show, and what rulers do you think we'll see?
I think we'll start somewhere in it's kind of the middle of the Second Age. So it's Telperion is the queen. Her brother, Silimo, is for some reason or another not the ruling in any way. His son, Minaster, is in line for the throne because Telperion is childless. And there's a general involved in some way, Curiator, and that's basically the power structure and the dramatic persons in the Numenorian court at that time. And I think that's much more logical, going straight into the late period of Numenor with Ar-Pharazôn the Golden and all that.
Yep, and Gallifrey, looking at the first picture on screen that I'm showing, we can see how massive Numenor actually is, and we can see the grand. Do you think Amazon will be able to show the grand scale of it all?
I do think they will. I think they'll make it very impressive. Amazon spent a speculated $1 billion into the show, so I think graphics is not going to be lacking at all.
Exactly, with $1 billion budget, you can pretty much show a lot. And Mr. Penguin Poppins, do you think that seeing Numenor in the Second Age would also potentially dwarf, or not dwarf, but diminish Gondor, and seeing how Gondor was a big, and we have Osgiliath within the Third Age, but Numenor was a whole island and was a whole different level. So, what are your thoughts?
It absolutely should. One of the prevailing themes of Tolkien is decay. The setting is slowly decaying. What was older was bigger, stronger, grander, better. Gondor, especially the Gondor, just using the films as a starting point, though I hope it's not in continuity, but for the sake of discussion, say they are. Gondor, that was basically Gondor as a rump state, a remnant of Gondor at its height, which was still just a shadow of Numenor at its prime. So, remember the scene where we see the Argonath for the first time? What we're shown there that should basically be, if you're a Numenorean, look at that and think, yeah, that's cool. I have one of those in my backyard. It's really not that quite impressive to them, though. To people in the Third Age, it's something that is unimaginably huge, shaped by the hands of giants themselves.
Yes, and it also has to be put into perspective how different the two different regions will be. And seeing the next picture, which I'm showing on screen, again shows how, on scale, how massive Numenor could potentially be. And Nicoline, so when even looking at this picture, you can see the grand scale of it. But do you think a potential problem could be if they go too big for the show? It could potentially take us out of it a bit because it seems too big and too unimaginable. Do you think that could be a problem for Amazon?
Yeah, totally. I think that one of the things that, sorry, is there an echo?
That's me.
Yeah, I definitely think that there could be an issue because if you go too big, it can look fake. They will put a lot of responsibility on themselves for like using too much CGI can make it look like a computer game, which is kind of takes away from the raw, authentic beauty that is Tolkien's world. Um, so I think they have to be careful with that, and also because they're using it's not just going to be about Numenor; it's going to be about other parts of Middle Earth as well. If they go too big on Numenor, it could potentially. Uh, then they should make a season that just focuses on Numenor, which I don't think they will do.
Yeah, and
To just as an aside, I mean, it's interesting how on the one hand those large buildings would look fake, yet we live in a day and age where there are skyscrapers 50 or even 100 feet, 100 stories tall. There are massive football and American football stadiums around that are completely enclosed indoors. And yet we're talking about how CGI would look fake. But something that comes to my mind is I haven't seen the 4K versions of Lord of the Rings, but something that's interesting when I last watched them. Sure, some of the CGI you can clearly tell that it's CGI. It hasn't aged well, but the bigatures still look good and they still look tangible to me. So that could be a way that you could show scale through the use of bigatures and actual backdrops. Anyway,
Yeah, I don't
just a
think
thought.
I don't think in CGI today that those big wide shots are really too problematic to make seem real. I think CGI kind of struggles more in mid shots. It's very good in
Yeah, that's
close-ups.
true.
You see all the details that sell it, and the wide shots too. It tends to work. So I don't know that we should have a problem with that. I think we'll manage fine.
And in my opinion, The Hobbit really just kind of messed up because it was like a kid playing with a toy. The entire time, the entire trilogy, it was all just CGI, and it was not only not too real looking, but it was just exaggerated. Like when the dwarves were bouncing out of barrels onto orc heads and killing them and rolling around, that stuff was just not very believable. So if they introduce Numenor in a more believable way, physically and architecturally, then it will probably look a little bit less cheesy.
Yeah, true.
If you're gonna be big, the buildings have to look like they support themselves. If you guys have seen St. Paul's and St. Peter's in Rome, and
But do you think they will go big though? Because like based on the stuff that they did in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, although it's portrayed as a massive, absolutely incredible society, do you think they will stick to sort of what they created in the movies, or no? I'm not
it,
sure.
I
it's
think they will.
it's a
I think
completely
they're going
separate
to,
production. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a completely separate
but they still
production
need to make sure
company.
it looks similar.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I agree. Uh, I think what Jackson created is just too embedded in the culture, in everyone's mind to really stray too far from. Which, personally, as a guy who loves the books first, it's a little disappointing.
yep. And one thing I want to touch upon, I'm sure Galathine, you have watched The Mandalorian by now. I haven't watched today's episode, but apparently I heard for spoiler already that actually I should have mentioned that. My bad. But one thing that Amazon, well, this is all speculation, that Amazon could be using is in fact those LED screens from The Mandalorian to maybe show these backdrops and show these massive scale pictures for us to see. So Galathine, I think you've seen The Mandalorian. Do you think this has worked well for it? And do you think Amazon is good that Amazon is incorporating this?
Well, first off, thank you for not spoiling. I have seen The Mandalorian, not the next episode yet. I think that I'm glad that they are using the LED screens. I think that they could get by with just using green screens though, because in The Mandalorian, the reason they had to use LED screens is because the Mandalorian's armor is shiny. So every single time that he would just say walk into some green screen area, there would be a green reflection on his armor.
It's called green
So
scale, yeah.
yeah, that's why they had to have the LED screens, because it would reflect the actual background that they're using. And then post editing would also help with any reflection, anything that went wrong with it. Um, and I think LED screens are really good because in this show we're probably going to see a lot of combat, shiny little armor trinkets, whatnot, swords. So I think that using LED screens is really, really, really good. And
Oh yeah,
it's much better
definitely.
than using the CGI that The Hobbit used.
True. I agree.
And with all these factors coming in, but one thing you talked about the metal, and as I'm showing on now, how they're going to be showing the ships on the Numenorian fleet, which we know is led by Kiriata. I believe that it was the head of the fleet, as shown on screen right now. We're obviously going to see a massive, massive Numenorian fleet, as we know that they come to the aid to Lindon when I believe Sauron was actually besieging, I believe, Lindon and mostly Eregion though. But how do you think Amazon would go massive and maybe build ships like we? I'm not sure if any of you've seen Vikings, but they used lots and lots of real life Viking ships. But it'll be interesting. Do you think Amazon will produce lots of real life ships? As also we know that back in February they were filming in film tags at Camus Film Studios. So, Nicola, what's your opinion on this?
Well, I hope they do, but I mean, you never know with these productions. It looks so much cooler when they do it, but I mean, they have the option of using CGI, so they might build maybe one or two, and then they might use the rest as CGI or as making them as VFX. But no, I think it would be cool if they did, because they're gonna have to shoot like within the ship as well. Maybe there are storylines unfolding on these ships that are both new and old. So I definitely think they should, but I don't know if they will.
As far as I know, shooting on water with actual vessels that float is prohibitively expensive. I think it's the single factor that bumped like Pirates of the Caribbean to be some of the most expensive movies ever made, because they were shooting actual ships underwater. It was the same with
That's a great
Jaws.
place. That's a great
Yeah.
place to use LED screens too.
And we have seen whatever few set photos we've seen have been mostly like a big pool of water in front of a green screen with a little bit of wharf or something. So I think they are relying on green screen for those,
Yeah,
maritime
probably.
scenes, which is understandable.
Yeah, but at the same time, back in January, Alyssa Cadwell, I believe, who did work on Aquaman as I believe Nicole Kidman's stunt double, and she was injured due to having her, she I think banged her head on a boat within a big water cage. Do you think this implies anything, Mr. Penguin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is Numenor. We know there's going to be the sea is a huge influence on Numenor's culture. So they absolutely should have ships. I don't really think they would actually build a ship, because one of the sense we get, from reading The Mariner's Wife, or at least up until it just stops, is they keep building bigger and bigger ships, and we're led to believe in the Akalabeth, excuse me, that the ships that they have then are just incredibly massive. I wouldn't say they're quite as big as a modern battleship, but I mean, I'm just picturing, something like the Titanic, only constructed of wood and using sails. And do you really want to build a scale model of that? No. Better to use just force perspectives, create a deck, and just use modern filmmaking techniques to make it look like you have an actual boat. My concern is, as Nikki said, was that if it's, with the CGI, you've got to make it real. And I I want to believe that these are real ships. Something that crossed my mind as we were talking about those larger than life things was the latest Godzilla movies. Absolutely terrible movies, but one of the things they did was make massive creatures look real by largely showing them from the perspective of the human beings observing them. We were hardly ever on eye level with Godzilla. We were always looking up at Godzilla, whether directly under him or from a distance. And I think that's something that you have to do to capture the scale of the ships and the scale of Numenor in this setting.
Yeah.
I would agree as well. I think if they build a really nice, rustic, real-looking deck, and then just used LED screens beyond the deck for the sea or for the reflection of the sea, whatever it may be, or for other ships, then I think it would look very realistic.
I think perfectly to implement in here. Chen, do you think we will be seeing a fleet of 200 steamrolling ships coming to the aid of the West?
The steampunk question. That's an issue. I think it only exists in one version of the story from The Lost Road. I don't think it's actually really a part of the canon version of the story, as much as you can say that there is one. Regardless of whether it's canon or not, I just don't think it's a very good idea. It will look weird. I know Guillermo del Toro wanted a steampunk aesthetic for Erebor, actually. I remember thinking that was weird, but Numenor, I think even more so. It would just be strange, and I don't know. It doesn't fit. I think they'll just be big, Roman-like type ships like triremes and that sort of thing, other than some kind of 19th century steamboat.
Counterpoint. Maybe you guys have seen The Last Airbender, and specifically referring to the show. The original show, the Fire Nation, was very steampunk inspired. Oh, sorry. Let me repeat that. If any of you guys have seen The Last Airbender show, the Fire Nation was very steampunk inspired. They were using iron, ships, powered by steam, presumably powered by coal. So, it was interesting, and it wasn't terribly distracting from a setting in which everything else was medieval, with people using swords, spears. Oh, and some people could manipulate elements and kill each other with that.
But as always, this steampunk debate will always be within, I think, Tolkien community quite an interesting debate, as some people prefer it, think it's interesting, but I believe even Tolkien himself, I don't think would have imagined, I said before, a fleet of 200 ships of steam engine ships coming to Lyndon's aid. But moving on, Nikki, I would like to point out something. That do you think in the show we should see a bit of arrogance from Numenor, from their architecture, from potentially their weapons compared to the elves or even the dwarves of Khazad-dûm? Do you think there should be a higher level of potential infrastructure and the quality of weapons, and they should be noticeable within the show?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? You sort of dropped off halfway.
What I was trying to touch upon is that do you think there should be arrogance from the Numenorians and Numenors, and the shown between in the show due to how great their infrastructure, their structure was, how great their
Yes.
architecture was? Do you think, and
Yep.
for example, their weapons? Do you think this should be clearly shown within the show?
I think so, yeah. I've been thinking about this as well, because there is a difference, and it is being described in Tolkien's writings as well, how they sort of look down on the middlemen and all of this. So I think it should be, but I think there will be characters that you still like. So they have to be careful with the balance there. And then talking about the steampunk as well. I love steampunk, but I don't think it fits in Tolkien's world.
Yeah, as said before, it's always up for debate whether steampunk does work within Tolkien's works or not. But One interesting aspect I would like to move on to is the Melkor shipping that we know happens under our Farazon. How should Amazon go by doing this? Should we see some nude bodies? Should we see some decapitations? What do you think? What are your thoughts on this, Caliphane?
As for nudity, I really don't think we should see any, because if Tolkien was making it, he was a Catholic. He would definitely not have approved of it. Maybe we can allude to it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As for decapitations, sure, but then again, Tolkien was a Catholic, and if he was watching it, he would definitely not like seeing heads just get chopped off, as in Gladiator or something. So I guess we can show some head chopping, but just shouldn't be too gratuitous about it, maybe.
How about if this head chopping was maybe ceremonious, as it was, as showing that I'm sacrificing myself, and some people who are getting sacrificed might be happy about it? Do you think that would be the way? Because of course I do not want nudity in the show for the sake of nudity, but I believe it would be. I think the only exception I would be fine with is if they use it the within the within the within the rituals. So what do you think of that, Hen?
Yeah, I was aiming for this from the start because I think the aesthetic should be quite like Gladiator, because Numenor is kind of Rome, and I think Middle Earth kind of needs this kind of grittiness to it. And I always liked the Lord of the Rings movies. They came out around the same time as a string of really, really, really good, gritty historical epics like Braveheart and Gladiator, and then Kingdom of Heaven and Troy. Okay, not so good, but still the same idea. And it's really within the same ballpark. It's the same kind of thing, except PG-13. And I always like that a lot. And I think it would be right to aim at that level. And I don't think, in general, you can very easily make Tolkien adaptations too violent. I think that you really have to work extra hard to make him too violent, because there is violence in his works. There is, medieval sword fighting and things, and you can do it PG-13. But even when I look at the movies, which I love, I always go, couldn't that have been more bloody? Even a silly fantasy movie from the 80s like Excalibur or Conan is more violent than that. And I do like that kind of grittiness to it, and something like the kind of satanic cult they do. Sure, I mean, to do it not bloody would be, to me, a bit kind of sanctimonious almost in a way. So yeah, I'd like it to be really kind of grungy, and
Yeah,
I
and it
agree.
I don't know.
You go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say that, there's elements in Tolkien that are, I mean, this is a setting where warfare is conducted by people stabbing at each other in close proximity. But, to contrast this with Game of Thrones or other things, is that Tolkien, his world doesn't revel in the violence. It doesn't celebrate it. It's there, but I think you have to strike a balance between, okay, so every now and again I think something is good to shock or surprise the audience, but when it's nonstop violence, when it almost becomes celebration of all the ways you can destroy the human form, that's a problem.
I'm
Same
not,
thing.
yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing with nudity. I mean, we've all read The Children of Hurin. We know about how Turin chases. Oh, the elf escapes me, makes him run around naked while he chases after him with a sword, or when he encounters his spoiler alert, his sister, and thinks, yeah, this chick's pretty hot, I should marry her, and she's naked and amnesiac in the woods. Or of course, the silly example of the hobbits running around naked on the grass after escaping the burial grounds. Yeah, there's nudity, but once again, it's not celebrating it. It's just a statement of fact. Oh, and they're naked right now. Oh, Frodo naked in the tower again.
It's not sexualized.
It's not sexualized. It's
telling
not.
you.
Yeah, all right. These two love each other. They're about to get it on. I mean, not to be crass, but if I want to see tits, that's what Pornhub is for. So
It's true. That's why I think like something like Gladiator is a good example, because Gladiator doesn't have nudity actually. It has violence. It's rated R, but it's not really that extreme. I don't think. So I think that's kind of the right, and the same with Kingdom of Heaven. And I think that's the right balance to strike. Braveheart, I would say, is just a little bit more violent, and it has a little bit of nudity, although I think it's beautiful. So yeah, I think Gladiator is a right balance to
It's kind
strike.
of like it's glazed over. Like it's not violence for the sake of violence, and it's not violence for evil. It's violence for the sake of survival, or because you have to do it. It's not let's go out and kill someone or let's go out and torture someone. In Tolkien, it's the same with nudity and violence, that they just sort of it's there and it's natural and it's normal and it's for survival, but
Yes.
that's it.
And as for Tolkien, I think the violence is part of the tragedy of the story. I don't know which of you said it. It might have been Penguin, but it really is the tragedy of the story, and it's not celebrated. So I think they should have it, but they should only have it sometimes, like, in the battles, which we're going to see. Don't know exactly what those are going to be. Not every single death should be filled of gore. I think there should be, for certain, a lot of gore in some areas, but in other areas, we shouldn't see as much.
I do believe though that because he sort of like he doesn't describe the deaths, he doesn't go into detail about them. There are some dramatic parts, but he doesn't go into like full detail about what's going on, and sometimes he'll just mention that people were tortured or there were fights and this happened. But I think that also leaves a lot of room for interpretation, which means that we Amazon could potentially do more than what Tolkien has written in words.
Yep, and it's always going to be a very interesting topic, and there's lots of different views on it, which is why Amazon is maybe a bit of a tricky job of Amazon. Should they implement this level of violence or even potentially level of nudity? But moving on now, as shown on screen is a picture of which for artist I will leave the link in the description to. I'm sorry I don't know your name right now, but it shows the city of Numenor. Well, not city of Numenor, a city within Numenor. I'm not sure specifically which one, but I think at eye level I think it's a palace. We can see it's above most of the buildings, but it looks like there's a even bigger palace in the background. But Penguin, how much do you think we're actually going to be within this within cities of Numenor and actually walking around and seeing all the architecture, and maybe how often do you think Amazon would focus on the palaces, etc.?
it's hard to say. Uh, without having a clear idea of the setting. I mean, of course, if this is late Numenor, pre downfall, that's where most of the action of in the story really takes place. Now, if this is Forging of the Rings era, depending on which, there may or may not be a lot going on in Numenor, depending on what story you choose to tell. So, I could really dive into what stories they could tell, but as for speculating how much time they're going to go in there without knowing that, yeah, I really don't have much.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how often we are actually going to be focused, how often Amazon are going to focus within, and thank you, please can you mute your mic? And also, finally, the last thing within Numenor that I'm going to touch upon, which is probably going to be seen in the show, is of course the downfall of Numenor. And within the show is going to be probably one of the biggest events, and how Amazon show it will be key. So, Gallifane, how do you think Amazon should go by doing this? Should it be over the top, lots of water seas coming in? Maybe do you think Amazon would be silly enough to even show Eru? But I don't think that would be a good idea. But do you think it would be over the top dramatic, or do you think it should be more I'm not sure if you've seen the movie 2012 where it feels like it's the end of the world. The sea just comes over all the lands and the whole world gets engulfed. So do you think they should go for a more over the top dramatic tone with the downfall of Numenor, or more of a more scary and more potentially more serious tone and be like, these people are actually gonna die?
I think they should make it as dramatic as they possibly can.
Mm.
I've already said that I think the show is going to focus around Sauron, so the downfall of Numenor could be vital, and because it is focusing on Sauron, this is when Sauron dies, of course not dies, just sort of dies. So I think they really need to be careful in how they portray this as well. They need to be sure that they make it dramatic. If you just start off with the sinking of Numenor, I think that's something huge in the storyline that's wasted. So maybe the first season's showing the men of Numenor, and then it sort of ends with the sinking of Numenor. Or probably not the first season, maybe the second, third season might end with that. And I think that would be a great season ending. But of course, it would not be a very good ending to the entire series.
Yep, and as you see on screen right now, we see the water coming in and the building being basically destroyed. Do you think, Nikki, do you think we'll be seeing buildings getting blown up and we see massive, massive palaces crumbling down? I feel like, because it does, of course, it sinks. It's the downfall of Numenor. The island sinks. Do you think Amazon should do a lot of this practically? Because of course, lots of it going to be CGI. But do you think Amazon should just come in there, get a crane, and just knock a few buildings over on set? Because remember, they do have a high budget.
I mean, I think we're gonna see it dramatically. I think yes, there should be buildings falling apart, things being destroyed, people in the streets. I do believe that the storyline might be that we see what they did for Numenor to be uh, fallen or for their downfall. I think also we might see the rise of the faithful and their fight, and then maybe also follow them off the island and away and over to Middle Earth. Um, and somehow I feel like they should make it so that, of course, yeah, you feel bad, all of these people are gonna die, but also that you kind of are like, oh well, some of them kind of, sort of, maybe potentially deserved it a little bit. Because otherwise it'll just be complete heartbreak. Like, I turn off Titanic when the boat sinks, and I kind of feel like this is the part when the boat sinks. So it's gonna be
It
tough
is.
to watch.
It
I don't
is.
know. Titanic was I mean, you kind of feel like, okay, I watched this to see the boat sink, and somehow I got sucked into 2.5 hours of a teenage love story. But
Pretty much.
that's a whole other
Yeah.
story.
That's a good example to aspire to. Actually, Titanic. That's a very, very good model for the sinking of Numenor.
Yeah,
And
that's
just
the
like with the
image I have in my
Titanic,
head, yeah.
we know that
What?
we know that Numenor is going to sink. So just like the Titanic, you know what's going to happen. So they have to make everything as interesting as it can possibly get. Even the smaller things like the colonies in Middle Earth, they need to make everything big, and they need to make it different than what you see in the books. Because if they just stick exactly to the storyline and don't invest a lot in the characters and how things are done, then everyone's going to know how it ends up, and it just won't be interesting.
Uh, Thought on just how to depict Numenor. How many big budget disaster movies have we seen over the past couple of decades? Now, continuing my tradition of bringing up and referencing otherwise terrible movies, let me mention the first 5 minutes of the Batman versus Superman movie, which is basically the fight from Man of Steel, but shown from Bruce Wayne's perspective on the ground as he's driving through Metropolis. I think that added a whole new level. Instead of seeing, instead of seeing the massive destruction from, a god's eye view with sweeping cameras, you're looking at it all from the ground up. And, imagine juxtapositioning Sauron, in his perspective in the temple, laughing, think this is all great. Then all of a sudden he's realized, oh, wait, I'm on this island. And then, of course, is it Muriel, the queen?
Oh, Muriel, yeah.
Muriel. And there's all these pictures of her on the mountain with the big wave sweeping over. And I feel like there's a great, you could have it through her eyes. And, she's lost so much because she was the queen. She was the daughter of Tar Palantir, basically the king who tried to lead Numenor to repent. He failed. There's a civil war.
Yeah.
She was forcibly married to was her cousin, right?
Cousin,
Is that
yeah.
the relation? Cousin.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of thinking, her story is a bit of a tragedy, and trying to, okay, how do I fight against the influence of, the darkening of his heart? How do I fight against the influence of Sauron? She could have had a chance, perhaps, to get on the boats with Elendil and the rest of the faithful, and somehow refused. And there's this illustration that I think kind of resonates with the way Tolkien writes about his good people and how they behave. I saw this when New Orleans and later Houston was flooded. You got the guys climbing to the roof of his house. The water is rising. Someone drives by on a Jeep and they say, "Hey, quick, get in." And the guy on the roof says, "No, no, no, it's okay. God will save me." Then the water rises higher. A guy comes by on a boat saying, "Hey, get on the boat. We'll rescue you." The guy says, "No, God will save me." The water rises again. A helicopter flows by. They drop a rope, and the pilot says, "Hey, climb on. We'll save you." And no, no. And the guy says, "No, God will save me." And finally, the person says, the water rises. The person drowns. They go to heaven and they meet God. And God says, and he says to God, "Well, why didn't you save me?" And the guy says, "Well, I sent a car. I sent a boat. I sent a helicopter. What more do you want from me?" And as if you read Lord of the Rings, you get the real sense that Providence is watching over them, and Elrond, Gandalf, Aragorn, they all act in the belief or the faith. I think the term Tolkien uses in the universe is Estel, right? Hope that, if you do your part, God will see to the rest. And, she basically, could be an example of, well, let me, she didn't do her part. She didn't take the advantages that were given to her, and so now she's on an island drowning. At least that's what I think whenever I see that picture. Sorry for the long
Yeah.
ramble.
I kind of feel like we'll be following a lot of different stories. As it's happening, we will see some terrible fates. We will see some getting away. And I kind of get the feeling of, if you've ever seen Pompeii and the ending there, that's kind of the vibe that I get from her as well. So yeah, I think we'll see. That's definitely one of the people that we'd want to follow during the downfall of Numenor, and then of course the faithful and how they get away, and everyone we want punished after watching them act terribly during these seasons as well. We'll probably see some of them fall. So I think it will be a very, very exciting episode, if not episodes, of whatever season they're going to show it in.
Yeah. And touching upon the idea of God, as Penguin was talking to earlier, and I'm sorry, Chen, that I keep on asking you some of the more outrageous suggestions, but do you think Amazon should go to the lengths of showing a real avatar, bringing it down, or would that be nonsensical?
I mean, I'm all for in the creative process, like exploring different things, but on the whole, I would say no, I don't think it's a good idea. I think Stanley Kubrick said it when they were trying to put aliens into 2001. He said, well, after a while, he said it, but you can't really show the face of God on film, can you? Because it will just be mystifying. And I think that's the case here. I don't think we'll see here anything, not just of Eru, but I think of the Valar as well. I just think it will be. It's the sort of thing that can only be disappointing. Never match the imagination of the audience.
Yes, always a touchy subject, as no matter how you show the Vala and the gods, is never going to be how we imagined it for some people 30, 40, 50 years. I'll never be up there. But now, moving on to the final topic, which is the armory, weaponry, etc. So, Gallifane, I think I've asked you this earlier, or was it Nikki? I'm sorry, I don't remember which one, but should the weapons and the armory of the Numenorians outshine and almost be they should be arrogant to have this such major weaponry. As we know, the elves and potentially the dwarves do have good, well, probably the dwarves due to because they're always mining and be able to create these great stuff like, for example, mithril. But do you think that the Numenorians will be able to potentially be arrogant and show that we have these crossbows, we have these great swords, etc.?
Yeah, I think that they are going to have a great, vast armory, very powerful. And one big the reason that I think that I'm glad that they use the LED screens is because if they do have all these shiny weapons, they're not going to want that green reflection that you'll get with a green screen. So I don't I don't remember anything in the um, canon about armories specifically. I know that Numenor was of course very powerful and they were looked up to by the men of Middle Earth early on, and I think they'll be very, very powerful. They will have swords. As for crossbows, they probably will. That's a pretty simple enough invention. I don't think that they'll have steampunk anything really, but they probably will have crossbows. Certainly bows, of course, spears,
Siege
and
weapons.
maybe some new weapons like the glaives, stuff like that.
About shiny. I mentioned the movie previously, and I'm sure I'm going to really annoy a couple of fans of that movie, John Berman's Excalibur. And I like John Berman, and Excalibur is actually it started life as a Lord of the Rings movie actually, and that movie has the stupidest looking shiny armor that I've ever seen in a movie in my life. And so making armor too shiny, not a good idea. In general, it just doesn't look good.
And this
So
is a bit unrelated, but if you're talking about the movie that I've seen, the guy had hair gel, which was just ridiculous. I don't know how long ago hair gel was made, but Excalibur is supposed to be in the whateverth century, and there would not have been hair gel back then. So I hope we don't see any men with hair gel in this
yeah,
series.
yeah, it's a
That's the
very
thing.
80s movie, yeah, in that way.
Something about the Numenorians, I think something that they should convey is power, and I don't necessarily mean that like, oh, every one of them is looks like a bodybuilder, but all there just needs to be a skill and some sort of power to them that's beyond just the caliber of weapons that they have. In Unfinished Tales, when the Numenoran reinforcements show up, you know, uh, they basically just completely wipe out all of Sauron's forces, and they save the elves, and these are elves who survived the First Age, who fought against Melkor, Morgoth, and then all of a sudden these mortal men show up, and they're not just. I had this conception a long time ago of the elves see this and think, oh crap, these guys are pretty powerful, awesome. But man, this means this whole fading thing is really real. Sauron sees this and thinks, wait, what have I been doing trying to corrupt and ensnare the elves all the time? Look at these Numenorians. I got to do something about these guys now. So whether their swords are made out of steel or iron, or they're flashy and ornate, or just bare bones and functional, there just needs to be a power and a purpose behind how they use those. And I think that's a pretty critical thing that Amazon has to get right to make me believe that the Numenorians are supermen in some form or another.
I kind of
Sure,
feel like that comes down to the acting of the actors, how they can sort of portray that sort of feeling and belief and that strength. A lot of it will come down to the actors. And on the armor as well, I want to say I kind of feel like the elves should have the shiny armor, while the Numenorians can have more detail to their armors. Kind of like the crown that Aragorn's getting at the end of Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. More details, more decorations, different colors put on the armor, different layers on the armor. So they look more royal, but they don't necessarily have to be more shiny.
And for a big chunk of their time, Numenor was at peace. And when you're at peace, obviously the weapons would be well kept, I'd imagine. So they would have a lot of shiny armor, new armor, and same with the swords.
Yep, and it is interesting to see how Amazon will show the Numenor to show this prowess and this arrogance from them. But from going from Gallifreyan to Nikki to Penguin to Ken, all of you, can you please give one thing that you look most looking forward to from Numenor and seeing Numenor on the show? Starting off with Gallifreyan.
I'm probably most excited about how Numenor is going to be shown. I think it's going to be somewhat of a cross between Rivendell and Gondor in the films. We know that they want somewhat of a sense of continuity in the series, and there's no better way than doing so than through architecture. It's a really good way of making viewers absent-mindedly make connections, and if they based their Numenorian architecture on that of Gondor's, it would look familiar, mighty, and all-around good, but something would be missing. That's why I think Numenor will also have a bit of Rivendell thrown into it. Not only could it be, not only could it highlight the relationship of elves and men, maybe, but it would. But the books also describe Numenor as beautiful as well as powerful. But they would definitely have to up the Gondor scale of Numenor because Gondor was, of course, much weaker, much more dwindled from Numenor.
Thank you. And Nikki?
As always, I'm looking the most forward to the character artists and the building of them. I do love my people and I do love the psychology behind it and loving and hating all these characters. But I'm also looking forward to seeing how they do the whole faithful versus the Kingsmen and how they show the how the Numenorians behave in general and how they show, I guess, good Numenorians from bad Numenorians and how they put them up against the elves and all of that. I'm looking forward to seeing, because it's such a big nation, it's such a big part of Tolkien's world, and in the end, it just becomes this myth that people talk about where Aragorn is the sole survivor, like the only person that we hear about, and he's pretty majestic. So I'm pretty excited about what they're gonna do with the whole Numenorian race, I guess you can say.
Yep, and I totally agree. And while you were talking, something just came to my head. And while Penguin, I'll ask you about what your most favorite thing is. Also, quickly talk about Black Numenorians. I've totally forgot about them right to the end. How do you think they'll be represented? While also again giving your own what you're most looking forward to.
I'm sorry, were you asking me my thoughts on the Black Numenorians or just kind of the general train of thoughts?
So yeah, I was just asking, how do you think Black Numenorians will be shown in the show, and then also your thought of what you're most looking forward to.
Okay, the Black Numenorians. I mean, let's at this in the Second Age, they're just Numenorians. Those are just the King's men, and so I would, so that kind of ties into what I'm looking forward to seeing is. I mean, of course, this all depends on how they treat the entire setting, but I want to see Numenor change. I want to see it go from, kind of peaceful and idyllic to, okay, yeah, we're awesome. Let's start building monuments to how great we are, to then, when they become imperialistic, they just become full on decadent. So even though the symbols they may utilize may stay fairly constant, it just becomes that much more decadent, that much more innate, that's rich. That picture of, I think it's Sauron or it's someone in the cult and wearing that, sneering under that ornate golden mask. I mean, I think that's kind of where I'd want Numenor to end up. Just absolutely over the top decadent. Yeah, that's the one. Uh, and Black Numenorians, and I think the Third Age should kind of continue that trend. Whereas, say, the Descendants of the Faithful would be more like you tell me. What? No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of English history right now. But was it Cromwell when everyone started wearing the black and kind of more severe clothing in contrast to the royalists who were a lot more flashy or ornate? Or am I just making something up?
Yeah, you are correct. During the 1640s, which was, I believe it was Charles I who was beheaded in 1649. But before that,
Yeah.
showing the parliamentarians versus the royalists, yeah, Como did do that to show that.
Yeah.
You're
So I
correct.
think that might be a nice contrast between the faithful who still are humble versus the King's Men, later Black Numenorians who still are like, nah, we're awesome, we're innate. Let's show how awesome we are. We're fabulous guys. So anyway, that's how I want to see Numenor. I want to see it change and transform over the course of the show, and hopefully they manage to show that this didn't happen all at once. They didn't go from the Sound of Music to Nazi Germany overnight.
Yeah. And finally, Chen,
Yeah.
what are you looking most forward to?
Yeah, the thing I would be looking most at, it's a combination of things. I think there is characters in Numenor. I think the tragedy of it is very good. We don't get a lot of good tragedy, do we now? We usually get guys win at the end type stories, and there is something to be said for stories that have a downbeat ending. I think this is, in some ways, that kind of story. And it's nice to have, and kind of reminds me of, end of Wagner's Götterdämmerung. Valhalla goes down in flames. There's an appeal to that type of story. Of course, the scale of it is very, very attractive to me. I like scale. I like it's what I like about Lord of the Rings. It's what I like about David Lean movies.
Yeah, and of course, having Numenor here would also help with the immense world building within Middle-earth. But that wraps up today's podcast, which is episode 3 on the aesthetic of Numenor. Thank you, Galathine, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Nikki.
No worries. Always fun.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Penguin.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, thank you, Chen.
Oh, yeah. No mention it. It was great.
But thank you guys for watching. Viewers at home, I really appreciate it. Please continue the support, as I know a lot of people are watching it and enjoying it. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Until the next video, my friends, or the next podcast as well. Goodbye.